Look north, far north, past the familiar maps of Europe, Asia, and North America, up to the top of the world to a vast, frozen expanse that for centuries was a footnote in history. This is the Arctic, a place of ice, silence, and myth. But you know, the silence is breaking, the ice is melting, and the world's great powers are turning their gaze northward with an intensity not seen since the Cold War. What was once a desolate wasteland is now becoming a theater of competition. A new great game is beginning not in the dusty plains of Central Asia, but on the shifting ice flows of the Arctic Ocean. The stakes are immense, and the rules are not yet written. The quiet tension is building. It's a tension you can feel in the hum of new icebreakers cutting through previously impassable waters. You can see it in the satellite images of new military bases rising from the permafrost, bristling with radar domes and missile launchers. This is not just about scientific exploration or, protecting polar bears. It is about power, resources, and strategic advantage. This looming crisis is driven by two powerful forces. The first is human ambition. Nations are hungry for the vast reserves of oil, gas, and minerals believed to be locked beneath the Arctic seabed. The second force is nature itself, or rather, our impact on it. Climate change is the key that is unlocking the Arctic's potential. So why should this matter to someone living in London, or Tokyo, or Sao Paulo? Because the Arctic is not Las Vegas. What happens in the Arctic does not stay in the Arctic. A conflict in this region could disrupt global energy supplies, snarl international shipping, and draw the world's major military powers into a direct confrontation. For Russia, the Arctic is not a distant frontier. It is its backyard. It is a core part of its national identity, its economic future, and its strategic defense. Look at a map. Russia's coastline stretches for nearly 15,000 miles along the Arctic Ocean, giving it a geographical advantage no other nation can match. From the Kremlin's perspective, controlling this vast territory is not a choice, it is a necessity. President Vladimir Putin has made the Arctic a national priority, pouring billions of dollars into a grand strategy designed to turn the region into a Russian stronghold. The military component of this strategy is the most visible and alarming. Russia has been systematically reopening and modernizing dozens of old Soviet-era military bases along its northern coast. These are not mere outposts. They are sophisticated, self-contained facilities, often painted in the colors of the Russian flag. Bases like the Arctic Trefoil on Alexandra Land are equipped with advanced radar systems, air defense missiles, and runways capable of handling strategic bombers. But this is not just about defense, it is about offense and economic control. The military buildup serves to protect Russia's immense economic interests in the region. To secure these assets and the shipping lanes that serve them, Russia has built up a formidable northern fleet, its most powerful naval force. Furthermore, it has constructed the world's largest fleet of icebreakers, including several nuclear-powered behemoths. These ships are the key to year-round access and control of the northern sea route, a shipping lane Russia aims to dominate. The Kremlin's message is clear and unambiguous. The Arctic is Russia's sphere of influence. Their strategy is comprehensive, combining military might with economic development and diplomatic assertiveness. This is a long-term vision, a multi-generational project to secure Russia's place as the preeminent Arctic power. The Arctic is a paradox. It is a barren, frozen landscape on the surface, yet beneath the ice and the frigid waters lies one of the world's last great untapped treasure chests. The primary allure is hydrocarbons. The United States Geological Survey estimates that the region may hold up to 13% of the world's undiscovered conventional oil, and a staggering 30% of its undiscovered natural gas. For an energy-hungry world, these numbers are impossible to ignore. For a country like Russia, whose economy is heavily dependent on energy exports, securing these resources is a matter of national survival, especially as its existing fields in Siberia begin to decline. These resources are not just numbers on a spreadsheet, they are the fuel of the global economy. The Yamal Peninsula in Russia's Arctic is already a hub of massive liquefied natural gas projects, shipping gas to markets in both Europe and Asia. Norway is developing its own offshore fields in the Barents Sea. Even the United States has significant oil operations in Arctic Alaska. As the ice recedes, areas that were once technologically and economically impossible to drill are becoming accessible. This creates a powerful incentive for nations to stake their claims and invest in the hugely expensive and difficult infrastructure needed to extract these riches. Beyond oil and gas, the Arctic is also thought to be rich in critical minerals. These are the building blocks of our modern technological world. The list includes rare earth elements essential for smartphones, electric vehicles, and advanced military hardware. Greenland, a semi-autonomous territory of Denmark, has become a focal point for this mineral rush, attracting intense interest from international mining companies, and notably, from China. But their extraction is fraught with peril. The harsh Arctic environment makes drilling operations incredibly risky, and the potential for a catastrophic oil spill in these pristine remote waters is a nightmare scenario for environmentalists and local indigenous communities. The immense potential reward, however, means that nations are willing to take that risk. The lure of the frozen treasure chest is a powerful driver of policy, pushing countries to assert their sovereignty and prepare for a future where the wealth of the Arctic is up for grabs. The great irony of the Arctic is that the very industry seeking to extract fossil fuels from it, oil and gas, is contributing to the climate change that is making it accessible. The Arctic is warming at least twice as fast as the rest of the planet, a phenomenon known as Arctic amplification. The consequences are stark and transformative. Each summer, the extent of the sea ice shrinks to a new record low. Multi-year ice, the thick, resilient ice that once choked the polar seas year-round, is disappearing. What was once a permanent, solid barrier is becoming a seasonal, navigable ocean. This is the single biggest physical change to the planet's geography in modern history. This great melt is opening up new waterways that could redraw the map of global trade. The most significant of these is the Northern Sea Route, which hugs the coast of Russia. For a ship traveling from Shanghai to Rotterdam, the Northern Sea Route can cut the journey time by up to 2 weeks compared to the traditional route through the Suez Canal. This translates into massive savings on fuel, crew costs, and insurance. While still challenging and dependent on icebreaker escorts, the route is becoming increasingly viable. In 2010, only 4 commercial vessels transited the Northern Sea Route. A decade later, that number had skyrocketed, with millions of tons of cargo moving through these waters. Another potential route is the Northwest Passage, which weaves through the islands of the Canadian Arctic archipelago. This route offers a similar shortcut between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. However, its ownership is a point of contention. Canada claims the passage as its internal waters, giving it the right to regulate and deny transit. The United States and other maritime nations disagree, viewing it as an international strait through which all ships have the right of innocent passage. As the ice melts and the passage becomes more navigable, this long-simmering legal dispute could easily escalate into a more serious diplomatic or even military confrontation. The receding ice does more than just open shipping lanes, it makes everything easier. It allows for longer seasons for resource exploration, construction, and military patrols. It enables fishing fleets to push further north, chasing fish stocks that are migrating to cooler waters and creating new potential for disputes over fishing rights. Climate change, therefore, is the great enabler. It is the catalyst transforming the Arctic from a theoretical strategic space into a practical and contested one. It is melting the physical barriers that once kept the region isolated, forcing nations to confront the new realities of an open Arctic Ocean much sooner than anyone expected. Russia may be the most aggressive player in the Arctic, but it is far from the only one. The United States, as an Arctic nation by virtue of Alaska, is slowly awakening to the new strategic reality. For years, Washington's focus was elsewhere, but the scale of Russia's military buildup has forced a reassessment. The United States is now increasing its military presence, conducting more frequent naval and air patrols, and investing in new polar-capable assets. However, it lags far behind Russia in one critical area: icebreakers. The United States has only a handful of aging vessels, a stark contrast to Russia's massive fleet. This icebreaker gap limits America's ability to operate and project power in the region year-round. Other Arctic nations are also reinforcing their positions. Canada, with its vast northern territory, and the disputed Northwest Passage, is modernizing its northern defenses and building new Arctic and offshore patrol ships. Norway, a NATO member that shares a border with Russia in the high north, is on the front line of this new competition. It regularly hosts NATO exercises and works closely with its allies to monitor Russian military activity radiating out from the heavily fortified Kola Peninsula, home to Russia's Northern Fleet and its nuclear submarine force. Perhaps the most interesting new player is the one with no Arctic coastline at all: China. Beijing has declared itself a near-Arctic state and is pursuing its ambitions through a Polar Silk Road initiative. Its strategy is less about military bases and more about science, economics, and diplomacy. China has invested heavily in its own icebreakers, established research stations, and sought to fund infrastructure projects in Arctic nations, most notably in Greenland and Iceland. Beijing understands the strategic importance of the new shipping routes and the region's resources. Its growing presence is viewed with suspicion by both Russia and the West, adding another layer of great power rivalry to the mix. This scramble involves all 8 members of the Arctic Council: Russia, the United States, Canada, Denmark via Greenland, Finland, Iceland, Norway, and Sweden, as well as a growing number of observer states like China, India, and the United Kingdom. Each nation is jockeying for position, trying to secure its interests before the rules of this new era are set in stone. The competition is playing out in diplomatic forums, scientific expeditions, and most ominously through military posturing. It is a multi-sided game where alliances are shifting and the potential for miscalculation is high. The Arctic is no longer the exclusive club it once was, it is now a global arena. The rising tensions in the Arctic are not abstract, they are centered on specific, tangible flashpoints where national interests could collide. The most obvious source of conflict is the competition over territory and resources. Under international law, a nation can claim exclusive economic rights to its continental shelf, extending up to 200 nautical miles from its coastline. But nations can claim an even larger area if they can prove that their continental shelf extends further. Another major flashpoint is freedom of navigation. As the northern sea route along Russia's coast becomes more viable, Moscow is asserting its right to control it. Russia requires foreign vessels to seek permission, pay transit fees, and use Russian icebreaker escorts. The United States and other maritime powers argue this violates international law, which they say guarantees freedom of passage. A deliberate freedom of navigation operation by the United States Navy, sailing a warship through the route without Russian permission, would be seen as a direct challenge to Moscow's sovereignty. The risk of military miscalculation is growing every day, as Russia, NATO, and the United States increase the frequency and scale of their military exercises. Their forces are operating in closer proximity than ever before. A Russian bomber probing NATO airspace, a United States submarine surfacing near a Russian base, or an aggressive maneuver by a naval vessel could lead to an accidental clash. In the harsh and unpredictable Arctic environment, where communications can be difficult and response times are long, a small incident could quickly spiral out of control. Finally, there is the potential for conflict to spill over from other parts of the world. The Arctic is not isolated from global geopolitics. If tensions between Russia and NATO escalate in Eastern Europe, the High North could become a second front. Russia's ballistic missile submarines, a key part of its nuclear deterrent, patrol from heavily protected bastions in the Arctic. In a major global crisis, NATO would be compelled to try and hunt these submarines, turning the Barents Sea and the wider Arctic Ocean into a primary zone of conflict between nuclear-armed powers. The future of the Arctic hangs precariously in the balance. We stand at a critical juncture where the choices made today by a handful of world leaders will determine whether the region becomes a model of peaceful cooperation or the epicenter of a new global crisis. The optimistic path is one of managed competition, guided by international law and diplomacy. Institutions like the Arctic Council, which for decades successfully fostered collaboration on scientific and environmental issues, could be empowered to handle these new security and economic challenges. However, the current trajectory points toward a more dangerous future. The logic of geography and power is pushing nations toward confrontation. Russia, feeling encircled by NATO and determined to restore its great power status, sees the Arctic as its fortress and its economic lifeline. The United States, awakening to the challenge, is moving to counter Russia's dominance. And China, the rising power, is determined to have its say. This is a classic recipe for great power conflict. If diplomacy fails, we could see an escalating arms race, disputed territories being seized by force, and key shipping lanes blockaded. The Cold War in the Arctic could turn hot. A conflict in the Arctic would have devastating consequences that would ripple across the globe. It would immediately threaten the world's energy supply, sending shockwaves through financial markets. It would disrupt global trade, raising the cost of goods for everyone. And most terrifyingly, a military clash between Russia and NATO in the High North would carry the ever-present risk of escalating to a nuclear exchange. What is at stake is not just a piece of frozen land, it is the very principle of whether a new frontier can be governed by laws or by force. The world's political climate is changing just as surely as the planet's physical one. The melting ice is revealing not only new resources and routes but also the raw ambitions of nations. Without strong leadership and a genuine commitment to de-escalation, the top of the world could become the stage for the 21st century's first major resource war. The world holds its breath, hoping that the silence of the Arctic is not broken by the sounds of conflict.